Book 12, The Cattle of the Sun. In this book, I want you to focus on taking some of your own notes. I'm going to not be telling you as much what to write down. I may tell you to look for something, like look for a simile in this slide, or write down this major event. But you need to be looking for every major event and everything Odysseus goes through. He is still telling the story of his journey, of how he ended up on Calypso's island, so you're still going to have some big events occur. So make sure you're adding those to your events. I also want you to start looking for themes. So a theme is a main idea. It's something that we can understand no matter where we're from in the world. Like we can all understand what it means to be love or to look for love. And a theme should be a sentence or a statement. So I want you to look for that. Like, what is Odysseus going through? What is he experiencing that we all experience? Is he experiencing heartache? That could be a theme. Is he experiencing loss? That could be a theme. Those are things that people experience no matter where they live, no matter their culture. So I want you to start thinking about those and adding some themes into your notes this time. Any new characters we come across are all going to be important. We're at the point in the book where anybody new is important, and you should be continually adding to Odysseus' character, anything new we learn, and any of his men that we learn about. So continue adding those things. If you have to write their names again, write their names again, but add to your notes. Now when our ship had left the ocean river rolling in her wake and launched out into open sea with its long swells to reach the island of Aea, east where the dawn, forever young, was home in dancing rings, and the sun has risings, heading in we beached our craft on the sands. The crew swung out on the low sloping shore, and there we fell asleep awaiting dawn's first light. As soon as dawn with her rose-red fingers shone again, I dispatched some men to Circe's halls to bring the dead Elpenor's body. We cut logs in haste, and out on the island's sharpest jutting headland held his funeral rites in sorrow, streaming tears. Once we had burned the dead man in the dead man's armor, heaping his grave mound, hauling a stone that coped it well. We planted his balanced oar aloft to crown his tomb, and so we saw to his rites, each step in turn. Nor did our coming back from death escape Circe. She hurried toward us, decked in rich regalia, handmaids following close with trays of bread and meats galore, and glinting ruddy wine. And the lustrous goddess, standing in our midst, hailed us warmly. "Ah, my darling reckless friends, you who ventured down to the house of death alive, doomed to die twice over. Others just die once. Come, take some food and drink some wine. Rest here the livelong day, and then tomorrow at daybreak you must sail. But I will set you a course and chart each sea mark, so neither on sea nor land will some new trap ensnare you in trouble, make you suffer more." Her foresight won our fighting spirits over, so all that day till the sun went down we sat and feasted on sides of meat and heady wine. And then when the sun had set and night came on, the men lay down to sleep by the ship's stern cables. But Circe, taking me by the hand, drew me away from all my shipmates there, and sat me down, and lying beside me, probed me for details. I told her the whole story, start to finish. Then the queenly goddess laid my course. Your descent to the dead is over, true, but listen closely to what I tell you now, and God himself will bring it back to mind. First, you will raise the island of the Sirens, those creatures who spellbind any man alive, whoever comes their way, whoever draws too close, off guard, and catches the Sirens' voices in the air. No sailing home for him, no wife rising to meet him, no happy children beaming up at their father's face. So Odysseus and his men have gone back to Circe's island. They've been to the land of the dead, and now they're back, and Circe is saying, okay, I'm going to tell you how to get home and get home safely, so listen to my directions. The high, thrilling song of the Sirens will transfix him, lolling there in their meadow round them, heaps of corpses, rotting away, rags of skin shriveling on their bones. Race straight past that coast. Soften some beeswax and stop your shipmates' ears so none can hear. None of the crew, but if you are bent on hearing, have them tie you hand and foot in the swift ship, erect at the mast block, lashed by ropes to the mast, so you can hear the siren's song to your heart's content. But if you plead, commanding your men to set you free, then they must lash you faster, rope on rope. But once your crew has rowed you past the Sirens, a choice of ropes is yours. I cannot advise you which to take or lead you through it all. You must decide for yourself. But I can tell you the ways of either course. On one side, beetling cliffs shoot up, and against them pound the huge, roaring breakers of the blue-eyed Amphitrite. The clashing rocks, they're called by all the blissful gods. Not even birds can escape them. No, not even the doves that veer and fly ambrosia home to Father Zeus. Even of those sheer rocks, always pick off one, and father wings one more to keep the number up. So what you need to know is a siren is a creature, and there's many different depictions. Sometimes they look more like mermaids, sometimes they're almost like ghosts, but they sing, and what they do is the men are like hypnotized by it, and they're forced to follow the siren's song, and it causes them to shipwreck. So a siren is actually trying to make a man shipwreck. And so she's telling Odysseus to go through there and go as fast as you can and put some beeswax in your ears, so like earplugs, so you can't hear the song. And she said if you really want to hear it, make sure that you are tied up, because otherwise the men will literally throw themselves overboard because they're hypnotized by the song. And then she said you have a choice. You can either go on Amphitrite's side, where you're going to have these huge rocks and no one can get away from them. No matter what, even birds go by there, they're slamming into the rocks and killed. No ship of men has ever approached and slipped past, always some disaster. Big timbers and sailors' corpses, whirled away by the waves and lethal blasts of fire. One ship alone, one deep-sea craft sailed clear. The Argo, sung by the world when headed home from Hades' shores. And she would have crashed against those giant rocks and sunk at once if Hera, for love of Jason, had not sped her through. This is referring to a mythological story, the story of Jason. His ship was the only one that did not crash, and that's because Hera helped him get through. On the other side loomed two enormous crags, one thrust into the vaulting sky, its jagged peaks, hooded around with a dark cloud that never leaves. No clear bright air can ever bathe its crown, not even in summer's heat or harvest time. No man on earth could scale it, mount its crest, not even with 20 hands and 20 feet for climbing. The rock so smooth, like dressed and burnished stone. And halfway up that cliffside stands a fog-bound cavern, gaping west toward Erebus, realm of death and darkness. Past it, great Odysseus, you should steer your ship. No rugged young archer could hit that yawning cave with the winged arrow shot from off the decks. Scylla lurks inside it, the yelping horror, yelping no louder than any suckling pup. But she's a grisly monster, I assure you. So I want you to pause here. You have a lot of figurative language. You have a description of this mountain. That's what it is basically. It's a giant mountain, and it's describing it. I want you to add some of that to your figurative language. You also have been introduced to a couple of monsters, and you're going to see these again. You can go ahead and start adding those to your character chart. Scylla is one here, and if you didn't get the characters earlier, the monsters, you can add them later on. We'll see them again as we continue. No one could look on her with any joy, not even a god who meets her face to face. She has 12 legs, all writhing, dangling down, and 6 long swaying necks, a hideous head on each head barbed with a triple row of fangs, thick-set, packed tight, armed to the hilt with black death. This is a description of Scylla that we just talked about on the last slide. You can add all of this characterization because it's what she looks like. She's a monster. Holed up in the cavern's bowels from her waist down, she shoots out her heads out of that terrifying pit, angling right from her nest, wildly sweeping the reefs for dolphins, dogfish, or in her bigger quarry she can drag from the thousands Amphitrite spawns in groaning seas. No mariners yet can boast they've raced their ship past Scylla's lair without some mortal blow. With each of her 6 heads, she snatches up a man from the dark prowler craft and whisks him off. The other crag is lower, you will see, Odysseus, though both lie side by side, an arrow shot apart. So now we're talking about the mountain on the other side. So one side there's a mountain, and it has Scylla. So that's what we're talking about right now. Amphitrite, remember, is what causes everything to slam against the walls, and so it's saying that she eats up everything that comes. She reaches out with her heads and snatches up anything that has been killed that way. Then on the other side, which is not far, so he would be sailing the ship in between these two mountains, she's now going to describe what is on the other side. And remember, Circe is telling Odysseus all of this. So when I say she, I'm referring to Circe, telling the story. The other crag is lower, you will see, Odysseus, though both lie side by side, an arrow shot apart. Atop it is a great fig tree rises, shaggy with leaves. Beneath it, awesome Charybdis gulps the dark water down. 3 times a day she vomits it up. 3 times she gulps it down. That terror. Don't be there when the whirlpool swallows down. Not even the earthquake god could save you from disaster. No. Hug Scylla's crag. Sail on past her, top speed. Better by far to lose 6 men and keep your ship than lose your entire crew. So Charybdis is another sea monster who lives underwater, and she throws the water up, which shoots it out of the water, and shoots water out of the water, and then she gulps it down, which causes a whirlpool. So the advice is, Odysseus, go closer to Scylla, because with her head, she might grab a couple of your men, but if you go closer to Charybdis, you're going to go in a whirlpool and you'll all die. Yes, yes, but tell me the truth now, goddess, I protested. Deadly Charybdis, can't I possibly cut and run from her and still fight Scylla off when Scylla strikes my men? So stubborn, the lovely goddess countered, hell-bent yet again on battle and feats of arms. Can't you bow down to the deathless gods themselves? Scylla is no mortal. She's an immortal devastation. Terrible, savage, wild. No fighting her, no defense. Just flee the creature, that's the only way. Waste any time arming for battle beside her rock. I fear she'll lunge out again with all of her 6 heads and seize as many men. No row for your lives. Invoke brute force. I tell you, Scylla's mother, she spawned her to scourge mankind so she can stop the monster's next attack. Then you will make the island of Thrinacia, where herds of the sun god's cattle graze, and fat sheep, and 7 herds of oxen, as many sheep flocks rich and woolly, 50 head in each. No breeding swells their number, nor do they ever die, and goddesses herd them on, nymphs with glinting hair. Phaethousa, Lampede, born to the sun god Helios by radiant Neaera. So again, we have some mythology here, but we're talking about the sun god Helios. We talked about Helios earlier, a few weeks ago, this semester, we talked about him. So we know that he is a god, he has his family there, and he has all these sheep that live on forever, and that's where his cattle graze, and his sheep. And they all live forever on this island. So once you get past Scylla and Charybdis and all those monsters, then you're going to come across the land of the island of the sea god, Helios. Their queenly mother bred and reared them both, then settled them on the island of Thrinacia, their homeland seas away, to guard their father's sheep and longhorn cattle. Leave the beasts unharmed, your mind set on home, and you may still reach Ithaca, bent with hardship, true, but harm them in any way, and I can see it now, your ship destroyed, your men destroyed as well. That should be foreshadowing and needs to go in your figurative language notes. That whole section right there, but harm them in any way, and I can see it now, your ship destroyed, your men destroyed as well. It's a warning. If you eat or harm any of the sheep or cattle, it's going to be bad for you, and you'll all be destroyed. And even if you escape, you'll come home late, all shipmates lost, and come a broken man. At those words, Dawn rose on her golden throne, and lustrous Circe made her way back up the island. I went straight to my ship, commanding all hands to take to the decks, and cast off cables quickly. They swung aboard at once, they sat to the oars in ranks, and in rhythm turned the water white with stroke on stroke. And Circe the nymph, with glossy braids, the awesome one who speaks with human voice, sent us a hardy shipmate. Yes, a fresh following wind ruffling up in our wake, bellying out our sail to drive our blue prow on, as we, securing the running gear from stern to stern, sat back while the wind and helmsman kept her true on course. And you can also add to figurative language, a fresh following wind ruffling up in our wake, and because they're considering the wind a shipmate, it says send us a hardy shipmate, and that's referring to the wind, so you can put that under personification in your notes. So they're all heading on their mission now. Circe is giving them directions on where to go, and now they're going to follow that. At last, in sore at heart, I told my shipmates, friends, it's wrong for only 1 or 2 to know the revelations that lovely Circe made to me alone. I'll tell you all so we can die with our eyes open wide open now. Our escape, our fate, and certain death together. First, she warns we must steer clear of the sirens, their enchanting song, their meadow starred with flowers. I alone was to hear their voices, so she said, but you must bind me with tight chafing ropes so I cannot move a muscle, bound to the spot, erected the mast block, lashed by ropes to the mast. And if I plead, commanding you to set me free, then lash me faster, rope on pressing rope. So I informed my shipmates point by point, all the while our trim ship was speeding toward the Sirens' Island, driven on by the brisk wind. But then the wind fell in an instant, all glazed to a dead calm. The mysterious power hushed the head-heaving swells. The oarsmen leapt to their feet, struck the sail, stowed it deep in the hold, and sat to the oarlocks, thrashing with polished oars, frothing the water white. So Odysseus explains what Circe has told them and how they need to tie him up so he can hear the siren's song. Then all of a sudden the wind stops, and so the men put this sail away and they go get their oars and they start rowing this ship. Now with a sharp sword I sliced an ample wheel of beeswax down into pieces, kneaded them into my 2 strong hands, and the wax soon grew soft, worked by my strength and Helios burning rays, the sun, at high noon. And I stopped the ears of my comrades one by one. That means he put the beeswax in their ears so they couldn't hear the siren song. They bound me hand and foot in the tight ship, erected the mast block, lashed by ropes to the mast, and rowed and churned the white caps stroke on stroke. We were just offshore as far as a man's shout can carry, scudding close when the sirens sensed at once a ship was racing past and burst into their high-thrilling song. Come closer, famous Odysseus, Achaea's pride and glory. Moor your ship on our coast so you can hear our song. Never has any sailor passed our shores in his black craft until he has heard the honeyed voices pouring from our lips, and once he hears to his heart's content sails on, a wiser man. We all know the pains that Achaeans and Trojans once endured. On the spreading plan of Troy when the gods willed it so, all that comes to pass on the fertile earth, we know it all. So this is the song of the sirens, and they're telling Odysseus that he needs to come and put his ship on the shore so you can come see them and hear their song, and they know everything. So they sent their ravishing voices out across the air, and the heart inside me throbbed to listen longer. I signaled the crew with frowns to set me free. They flung themselves at the oars and rowed harder. Perimedes and Eurylochus springing up at once to bind me faster with rope on chafing rope. A couple of things I want to point out here. Faster means tighter. And then whenever it says the heart inside me throbbed to listen longer, that is personification. His heart wanted to listen. It's figurative. It's not being literal. So here's where they're going past the sirens. Make sure you add your sirens in characterization and you write down the things we know about sirens, because that's something that's going to come up later on in quizzes and tests. But once we left the sirens fading in our wake, once we could hear their song no more, their urgent call, my steadfast crew was quick to remove the wax I'd used to seal their ears and loose the bonds that lashed me. We'd scarcely put on that island astern when suddenly I saw smoke and heavy breakers, heard their booming thunder. The men were terrified. Oar blades flew from their grip, clattering down to splash in the vessel's wash. She lay there, dead in the water. No hands to tug the blades that drove her on. Her is the ship. So they dropped all their oars because they were scared, and all the oars fell into the water. So there's no wind, and there's nothing to move the ship faster. So they're now just at the mercy of the waves and floating on. But I strode down the decks to rouse my crewmen, halting beside each one with a bracing, winning word. Friends, we're hardly strangers at meeting danger, and this danger is no worse than what we faced, when Cyclops pinned us up in his vaulted cave with crushing force. But even from there, my courage, my presence of mind and tactics saved us all, and we will live to remember this someday, I have no doubt. Up now, follow my orders, all of us at work at once. You men at the thwarts, lay on with your oars and strike the heaving swells, trusting that Zeus will pull us through these straits alive. So Odysseus kind of cheers them on, like, you guys got this, we've been through worse, and we're going to talk about this someday, so let's go. You helmsman, here's your order, burn it in your mind. The steering oar of our rolling ship is in your hands. Keep her clear of that smoke and surging breakers. Head for those crags or she'll catch you off guard. She'll yaw over there. You'll plunge us all in ruin. So I shouted. They snapped to each command. No mention of Scylla. How to fight that nightmare? For fear the men would panic, desert their oars, and huddle down and stow themselves away. But now I cleared my mind of Circe's orders, cramping my style, urging me not to arm at all. I donned my heroic armor, seized long spears in both my hands, and marched out on the half-deck, forward, hoping from there to catch first glimpse of Scylla, ghoul of the cliffs, swooping to kill my men. Scylla, ghoul of the cliffs, it's comparing Scylla to a ghoul, so it's a metaphor. We need to add that in figurative language. So I want to pause here and give some explanation. He didn't tell his men about Scylla because he knew they would be so afraid that it didn't do any good to warn them, because they would just panic and it wouldn't be good. So he gets ready, he has spears, and he's going to try to fight her, even though Circe said, don't do it, just keep sailing. But nowhere could I make her out, and my eyes ached, scanning that mist-bound rock face top to bottom. Now, wailing in fear, we rode up on those straits. Scylla to starboard, dreaded Charybdis off to port. Her horrible whirlpool gulping the sea surge down, down. But when she spewed it up like a cauldron of a raging fire, all her churning depths would seethe and heave, exploding spray showering down to splatter the peaks of both crags at once. So now they're going in between those mountains, and they have Charybdis on one side, Scylla on the other. But when she swallowed the sea surge down her gaping maw, the whole abyss lay bare, and the rocks around her roared, terrible, deafening. Bedrock showed deep down, boiling black with sand. An ashen terror gripped the men. But now, fearing death, all eyes fixed on Charybdis. Now Scylla snatched 6 men from her hollow ship, the toughest, strongest hands I had, and glancing backward over the deck, searching for my crew, I could see their hands and feet already hoisted, flailing, higher over my head. Look, wailing down at me, comrades riven in agony, shrieking out my name for one last time. Just as an angler, poised on a jutting rock, flings his treacherous bait on the offshore swell, whips his long rod, hook sheathed in an oxhorn lure, and whisks up little fish he flips on the beach break, writhing, gasping out their lives. So now they writhed, gasping as Scylla swung them up her cliff, and there, at her cabin's mouth, she bolted them down raw, screaming out, flinging their arms toward me, lost in that mortal struggle. Of all the pitiful things I've had to witness, suffering, searching out the pathways of the sea, this wrenched my heart the most. I want you to make sure you include some alliteration. I want you to find 2 examples of alliteration on this side and put them in your figurative language notes. There are way more than 2, but I want you to find 2. And then you also have an extended simile. Just as an angler poised on a jutting rock, an angler is a fisherman. So just as a fisherman is fishing and catches a fish and it flips and it continues that comparison, I want you to write down and explain that extended simile there, comparing a fisherman and the fish to Scylla and Odysseus' men. But now at last, putting the rocks, Scylla, and the dread Charybdis far astern, we quickly reach the good green island of the sun, where Helios, Lord Hyperion, keeps his fine cattle broad in the brow, and flocks of purebred sheep. So they've made it to the land of Helios. Still aboard my black ship in the open sea, I could hear the lowing cattle driven home, the bleating sheep, and I was struck once more by the words of the blind Theban prophet Tiresias, and Aeaean Circe too. Time and again they told me to shun this island of the sun, the joy of man. So I warned my shipmates gravely, sick at heart. Listen to me, my comrades, brothers in hardship. Let me tell you the dire prophecies of Tiresias, and Aeaean Circe too. Time and again they told me to shun this island of the sun, the joy of man. Here they warned the worst disaster awaits us. Row straight past these shores, race our black ship on. So I said, and the warnings broke their hearts. But Eurylochus weighed in at once, with mutiny on his mind. You're a hard man, Odysseus. Your fighting spirit stronger than ours. Your stamina never fails. You must be made of iron head to foot. So the men want to stop at this island because it's beautiful and it's rich and people want to go there. And Odysseus explains, I've had multiple people tell me this is where they can see in the future the worst thing's going to happen to us, so we need to go right past this island. And then Eurylochus jumps in with mutiny on his mind, which means wanting to go against his leader, and he's ready to fight Odysseus. Look, your crew's half dead with labor, starved for sleep, and you forbid us to set foot on this land, this island here, washed by the waves, where we might catch a decent meal again. Drained as we are, night falling fast, you'd have us desert this haven and blunder off into the mist-bound seas? Out of the night comes winds that shatter vessels. How can a man escape his headlong death if suddenly out of nowhere a cyclone hits, bred by the south or stormy west wind? They're the gales that tear his ship to splinters. The gods, our masters, willing or not, it seems. No, let's give way to the dark night, set our supper here, sit tight by our swift ship, and then at daybreak, board and launch her, make for open sea. So Eurylochus urged, and the shipmates cheered. Then I knew some power was brewing trouble for us. So I let fly with an anxious plea. Eurylochus, I am one against all. The upper hand is yours. But swear me a binding oath, all here, that if we come on a herd of cattle or fine flock of sheep, not one man among us, blind in his reckless ways, will slaughter an ox or ram. Just eat in peace, content with the food immortal Circe gave us. So the men want to stop and rest. They're exhausted. And they want to sleep overnight at this island, and then they'll get back on the ship, and they'll go and continue on their journey. So Odysseus gives in because they all want to stop, and he's outnumbered. And he says, but promise me you're not going to kill any of the animals. Because remember, these are the animals of the sun god. So Odysseus, first of all, has been warned against this. And second of all, you don't want to eat or take something of a god's. They quickly swore the oath that I required, and once they had vowed they'd never harm the herds, they moored our sturdy ship in the deep, narrow harbor, close to a fresh spring, and all hands disembarked and adeptly set about the evening meal. Once they put aside the desire for food and drink, they recalled our dear companions, wept for the men that Scylla plucked from the hollow ship and ate alive, and a welcome sleep came on them in their tears. But then, at the night's third watch, the stars just wheeling down, Zeus, who marshals the storm clouds, loosed a ripping wind. A howling demonic gale shrouded over in the thunderheads the earth and sea at once, and night swept down from the sky. When young Dawn with her rose-red fingers shone once more, we hauled our craft ashore, securing her in a vaulted cave, where nymphs must have lovely dancing rings and hold their sessions. There I called a muster, warning my shipmates yet again. Friends, we've food and drink aplenty aboard the ship. Keep hands off all these herds, or we will pay the price. The cattle, the sleek flocks, belong to an awesome master, Helios, god of the sun, who sees all, hears all things. So I warned, and my headstrong men complied. But for 1 whole month the south wind blew non-stop. No other wind came up, none but the south-southeast. So the south wind comes up, and that's going to send them the wrong way. So they have the ship kind of docked on the land, and Odysseus and his men are stuck on this island. But he's warned them again. He's like, don't eat the cattle. We have food. Eat the food on the ship. So they're stuck there for a whole month. As long as our food and ready wine held out, the crew, eager to save their lives, kept hands off the herds. But then, when supplies aboard had all run dry, when the men turned to hunting, forced to range for quarry with twisted hooks, for fish, birds, anything they could lay their hands on, hunger racked their bellies. I struck inland, up the island, there to pray to the gods. If only one might show me some way home. Crossing into the heartland, clear of the crew, I rinsed my hands in a sheltered spot. A windbreak. But soon as I prayed to all the gods who rule Olympus, down on my eyes they poured a sweet sound sleep, as Eurylochus opened up his fatal plan to friends. Listen to me, my comrades, brothers in hardship. All ways of dying are hateful to us poor mortals, true. But to die of hunger, starve to death, that's the worst of all. So up with you now, let's drive off the pick of Helios' sleek herds, slaughter them to the gods who rule the skies up there. If we ever make it home to Ithaca, native ground, erect at once a glorious temple to the sun god, line the walls with hordes of dazzling gifts. So Odysseus goes to find them some food. They've run out of food, and they've just been hunting birds and fish, because that's not Helios' property. What they cannot take is Helios' sheep or cattle. So while Odysseus sleeps, Eurylochus gets everybody and he's like, guys, this is what we'll do. I have a great plan. We're going to kill and we're going to take some of the animals that are Helios', so some sheep and some cattle, but if we make it home, make a temple for Helios, and we'll sacrifice some to the gods, and it'll be fine. But if the sun inflamed for his longhorn cattle means to wreck our ship and the other gods pitch in, I'd rather die at sea with one deep gulp of death than die by inches on this desolate island here. So Eurylochus' last thing he says here to convince them is, I would rather die at sea like quickly than die slowly of starvation. So he urged, and shipmates cheered again. At once they drove off the sun god's finest cattle close at hand. Not far from the blue-prowed ship they grazed, those splendid beasts with their broad brows and curving horns. Surrounding them in a ring, they lifted prayers to the gods, plucking fresh green leaves from a tall oak for the rite, since white-strewing barley was long gone on the ship. This is just in place of a way they would sacrifice the animals to the gods. Once they prayed, slaughtered, and skinned the cattle, they cut the thigh bones out. They wrapped them round in fat, a double fold sliced clean, and topped with strips of flesh. And since they had no wine to anoint the glowing victims, they made libations with water, broiling all the innards. And once they'd burned the bones and tasted the organs, hacked the rest into pieces, piercing them with spits. That moment, soothing slumber fell from my eyes, and down I went to our ship at the water's edge. But on my way, nearing the long-beaked craft, the smoky savor of roast came floating up around me. I groaned in anguish, crying out to the deathless gods. Father Zeus, the rest of you blissful gods who never die, you with your fatal sleep, you lulled me into disaster. So the men have taken, Odysseus' men have taken the cattle, they've cut it up, cooked it, and they're eating. And Odysseus wakes up and smells the meat, and he knows what has happened, and he blames Zeus. Left on their own, look what a monstrous thing my crew concocted. Quick as a flash, with her flaring rays, Lampetie sped the news to the sun on high that we had killed his herds. And Helios burst out in a rage to all the immortals. Father Zeus, the rest of you blissful gods who never die, punish them all, that crew of Laertes, son Odysseus. What an outrage! They killed my cattle, the great joy of my heart. Day in, day out, when I climbed the starry skies, and when I wheeled back from down the heights to touch the earth once more. Unless they pay me back in blood for the butchery of my herds, down I go to the house of death and blaze among the dead. But Zeus, who marshals the thunderheads, insisted, Son, you keep on shining among the deathless gods and mortal men across the good green earth. And as for the guilty ones, why, soon enough, on the wine-dark sea I'll hit their racing ship. With a white-hot bolt, I'll tear it into splinters. Or so I heard from the lovely nymph Calypso, who heard it herself. She said, from Hermes, god of guides. As soon as I reached our ship at the water's edge, I took the men to task, upbraiding each in turn to how to set things right. We couldn't find a way. So, Helios finds out that that Odysseus' men have eaten some of his animals, and he says, Zeus, either you handle this, or I'm going to make it basically not let the sun shine, because he's going to go down to Hades, the house of death. So Zeus says, no, let your sun shine, and I will hit the ship with a bolt, and it will tear into tiny little pieces, into little splinters. The cattle were dead already, and the gods soon showed us all some fateful signs. The hides began to crawl, the meat, both raw and roasted, bellowed out on the spits, and we heard a noise like the moan of lowing oxen. Yet 6 more days my eager companions feasted on the cattle of the sun. The pick of the herds they'd driven off. But then when Cronian Zeus brought on the 7th day, the wind in its ceaseless rays dropped at last, and stepping the mast at once, hoisting the wide sail, we boarded the ship and launched her, made for open sea. So that the wind finally changed 6 days later, so they were able to get on the ship and sail off again. But once we'd left that island in our wake, no land at all in sight, nothing but sea and sky. Then Zeus, the son of Cronus, mounted a thunderhead above our hollow ship, and the deep went black beneath it. Nor did the craft scud on much longer. All of a sudden, killer squalls attacked us, screaming out of the west. A murderous blast shearing the 2 forestays off, so the mast toppled backward, its running tackle spilling into the bilge. The mast itself went crashing into the stern. It struck the helmsman's head and crushed his skull to pulp, and down from his deck the man flipped like a diver. His hardy life spirit left his bones behind. So it's just explaining, if you know anything about the parts of a ship, how the ship was broken down when it was hit with the lightning bolt. And then how a man was actually hit with the mast and it crushed his head and he died. Then, in the same breath, Zeus hit the craft with a lightning bolt and thunder. Round she spun, reeling under the impact, filled with reeking brimstone. Shipmates pitching out of her, bobbing round like seahawks, swept along by the whitecaps past the trim black hull, and the god cut short their journey home forever. But I went lurching along our battered hulk, till the sea's surge ripped the plankings from the keel, and the waves swelled it away, stripped bare, and snapped the mast from the decks. But a backstay made of bull's hide still held fast, and with this I lashed the mast and keel together, made them one, riding my makeshift raft, as the wretched gale winds bore me on and on. At last the west wind quit its wild rage, but the south came on at once to hound me even more, making me double back my route toward cruel Charybdis. All night I was rushed back, and then at break of day I reached the crag of Scylla and dire Charybdis vortex, right when the dreaded whirlpool gulped the salt sea down. But heaving myself aloft to clutch at the fig tree's height, like a bat I clung to its trunk for dear life. Not a chance for a good firm foothold there, no clambering it up either. The roots too far to reach, the boughs too high overhead, huge swaying branches that overshadowed Charybdis. So what has happened is the ship has exploded and fallen apart, and basically Odysseus is floating on a part of the ship, and he's floating on it, and he's kind of made himself a little raft. So it actually pushed him back, and he's found a tree, and he's holding on to it. Odysseus holding on to this tree to keep from going into the whirlpool. But I held on, dead set, waiting for her to vomit my mast and keel back up again. So his raft has gone down into Charybdis' mouth, and he's waiting for her to vomit it back up so he can get it. Oh, how I ached for both, and back they came. Late, but at last, just as the hour, a judge at court, who settled the countless suits of brash young claimants, rises, the day's work done, and turns home for supper. That's when the timbers reared back up from Charybdis. I let go, I plunged with my hands and feet flailing, crashed into the waves beside those great beams, and scrambling aboard them fast. I rowed hard with my hands right through the straits, and the father of men and gods did not let Scylla see me, else I'd have died on the spot, no escape from death. The father of men and gods is Zeus, so Zeus actually protected Odysseus here from Scylla. I drifted along 9 days. On the 10th at night, the gods cast me up on Ogygia, Calypso's island, home of the dangerous nymph with glossy braids who speaks with human voice, and she took me in. She loved me. Why cover the same ground again? Just yesterday here at Hall I told you all the rest, you and your gracious wife. It goes against my grain to repeat a tale told once and told so clearly. So here's where the story ends, and Odysseus is saying, and then I landed on Calypso's island, and I've already told you that, so now you know how I got here. So that is the end of the story of what has happened to Odysseus between leaving Troy and ending up at this court of the king and queen, and that's where we'll pick up next.